I had always heard the warnings, you know? The stories about old apartments with a history. Too many years of silence, of secrets, things that didn't belong to this world creeping through the cracks. But I never believed any of it. Not until I moved into that apartment on 5th Street. It seemed like a steal. 1 bedroom, rent low for the area. I figured it was just a rundown building with a bad reputation. But when I stepped inside, it felt wrong from the start. The air was dense, thick, almost suffocating. And there was this strange smell like dust and something else, something metallic. I remember unpacking, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling at the back of my mind. But when I was putting away my things in the closet, I found something odd. A door. It wasn't just any door. It was hidden behind the regular closet wall. A door with peeling paint and an old brass doorknob, rusted with age. I couldn't make sense of it. How had I never noticed it before? Of course, I did what anyone would do. I opened it. Inside was nothing but darkness. Cold and empty. The air felt even heavier here. My stomach twisted. I stepped back, closing the door immediately. There was no room behind it, just an abyss that didn't belong in a building like this. I thought about telling the landlord, but something told me not to. I had to shake it off. After all, what could it have been? Some old maintenance closet that someone forgot about? Maybe. But that night, when I went to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I didn't want to admit it, but that night I heard something. A whisper, low and guttural, like it was coming from the walls themselves. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. There's nothing, I told myself. Just the old pipes. But the sound was different this time, more deliberate, more alive. And then, I saw it. The moment I saw it, my body went cold. I couldn't explain it, but there was a figure, just a shadow really standing at the foot of my bed. I blinked, hoping it was some trick of the light. But when I opened my eyes again, it was still there. A tall silhouette, but no distinct features, just a dark, shifting shape. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. It wasn't like anything I had ever seen before. It was like the air around it warped, making everything feel wrong. The whispering returned, but this time, it wasn't coming from the walls. It was coming from the figure itself. Leave. The voice was faint, but it was there, so real it seemed to vibrate through my bones. My heart was racing, and I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My limbs were paralyzed, locked in place by some force I couldn't comprehend. Then, without warning, the figure lunged forward, disappearing into the shadows of the room. I snapped out of it, my body trembling as I scrambled for the light switch. The room illuminated, but it didn't feel any safer. My pulse was still hammering in my chest, and I could still hear the faint whispers echoing in my mind. What the hell was that? Was I just imagining it? My mind tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was some leftover trauma from the stress of moving. Maybe it was the stress of being alone in a new city. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I wasn't alone in that apartment. The next day, I tried to get some answers. I went to the building's superintendent, Greg. He was a gruff, no-nonsense kind of guy, always wearing a scowl, but I figured maybe he knew something. When I asked him about the weird door in my closet, his face went pale. I had never seen him look so uncomfortable. He shifted, glancing around as if making sure no one could overhear. "You should never open that door," he muttered, lowering his voice. "It's not what you think. You need to leave. Don't stay there. Trust me. It's not a place for anyone." I was taken aback. "What do you mean? What's behind it?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked away, muttering something under his breath. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about his warning. I kept hearing that voice in my head. Leave, but I couldn't. I didn't know why, but something inside me told me I had to stay. I needed to understand what was going on in that apartment. The next day, I decided to confront the darkness. I couldn't get Greg's warning out of my head, but I had to know. Something deep inside me was pushing me to go back to that door, to see what was behind it. There was a part of me that believed if I didn't confront whatever it was, it would continue to haunt me. That night, after the sun had set and the apartment grew quiet, I gathered my courage. I walked to the closet, heart pounding in my chest. The door was still there, its old brass doorknob reflecting the dim light of my room. I reached for it, and for a moment I hesitated. My hand hovered, trembling. I thought about all the warnings, all the strange things I'd experienced in that place. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was lurking behind it. I turned the doorknob. The air hit me first, cold and heavy, like stepping into a forgotten tomb. It smelled like decay, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and makes your stomach churn. The room beyond was pitch black, but not like any ordinary darkness. This felt unnatural. The darkness seemed to stretch further than it should, as if it were a void, swallowing any light that tried to enter. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Something was there, in that blackness, watching me. A sound broke the silence, a low hum that seemed to vibrate through the floor, through my body. My eyes started to adjust, and I saw something faintly outlined against the blackness. A shape, a figure. It was too tall to be human, its limbs long and unnatural, twitching in a rhythm that didn't belong to the natural world. Its face, or what I assumed was its face, was a distorted blur, as if it were struggling to take shape. I froze. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to leave, but I couldn't move. It was like the air had thickened, weighing me down. Suddenly, it spoke. "I've been waiting." The voice was guttural, raspy, and somehow all around me. I could feel it inside my skull, crawling through my thoughts. "Waiting for you?" It whispered again, each word sending a chill down my spine. I could barely breathe, the room feeling smaller with every passing second. I could feel its presence, closer now, surrounding me. It wasn't a figure anymore. It was a force, something ancient, something malevolent. It reached for me. I had never moved faster in my life. My legs finally obeyed, and I slammed the door shut behind me, my heart racing. The air in my apartment felt heavy, suffocating, and I collapsed against the door, gasping for air. But I wasn't alone anymore. I sat there, shaking, against the door, not sure whether I should scream, run, or just hide under my blankets. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I could still hear it. Its voice, the way it echoed in my head, like a whispering shadow that wouldn't go away. For hours, I couldn't move. The terror kept me paralyzed, my mind replaying the image of that thing. Its long, twisted limbs, its distorted face, the sense of being hunted. It was as if something inside that apartment was feeding off my fear, pulling me closer to the edge of insanity. I tried to call someone, anyone, but the phone was dead. I thought it was just the storm outside, maybe a power surge, but when I checked the fuse box, everything was fine. My apartment was the only one in the entire building with no phone signal. And then the sounds started. At first, it was a faint scratching, like nails dragging against wood. I thought maybe it was rats in the walls or something, anything other than that thing I had seen. But the scratching grew louder, sharper, more deliberate. It was coming from inside the walls. It wasn't random. It was too rhythmic. It was like the walls were alive. My heart started pounding again. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle, trying to reinforce what little protection I had left. The scratching turned into something else, something worse. It sounded like whispers, but not just whispers. It was as if hundreds of voices were calling to me, urging me to open the door, to come back. I couldn't stop myself from walking to the door. I don't know why. The air in the apartment was suffocating, pulling me back to that dark space, to the thing that had reached for me. I unlocked the door slowly, the handle cold beneath my fingers, and with each movement, I felt the weight of those voices pressing against my mind. As I stepped inside the dark room again, the oppressive feeling returned instantly, but this time, there was something new. A shape in the corner of the room, barely visible but unmistakable. It was tall, hunched over, but unlike before, it was still waiting. And then it spoke again, its voice like gravel scraping against stone. "You can't leave." I tried to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't move. The door slammed shut behind me, It was as if the entire room was alive, trapping me in its suffocating grip. The shadows in the room started to writhe, pulling toward me, as if the darkness itself was reaching out, closing in. "You're ours now," it whispered. "You will never leave." And then I heard it, the sound of something dragging across the floor, approaching from behind me. I couldn't move. My breath caught in my throat. Whatever was in that room wasn't done with me yet. I didn't know how much time passed. Seconds? Minutes? Hours? My mind had lost track of everything, spinning in circles, the dark figure looming behind me, its presence suffocating. The whispers filled the air like a dense fog, twisting around me, crawling under my skin. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt dry, constricted, like something was choking me from the inside. I turned, desperately searching for an escape, but there was nothing. The walls seemed to close in, the floor beneath me felt unstable, and the very air felt wrong, like it was pressing down on my chest. I could feel it now. Whatever had been waiting for me, it wasn't alone. More figures began to emerge from the corners of the room, emerging from the shadows like distorted versions of people, their faces hollow, their bodies twisted and wrong. The room was filled with them, moving closer, inch by inch. "You shouldn't have opened the door," one of them whispered, its voice a distorted version of Greg's. I froze, my heart stopping for a second. How could it know? How could it sound like him? "They've been waiting. For you." I backed up, my hands scraping against the wall, my legs trembling beneath me. I had to get out. I had to leave. But the door, the one I had come through, wasn't there anymore. It was just another wall, smooth and lifeless. One of the figures stepped forward, its face now visible in the faint, flickering light. It had no eyes, just dark, hollow sockets, but I could feel its gaze, as if it were watching me from within my own mind. "You will never leave," it repeated, its voice a low growl. Suddenly, I felt something cold grab my ankle, dragging me backward. I screamed, but no one could hear me. The walls closed in tighter, the room constricting around me, suffocating me. My body felt paralyzed, and no matter how hard I fought, I couldn't move. I looked up at the ceiling, now covered with strange, crawling symbols. They were moving, twisting in unnatural patterns, like some sort of ancient language, one that didn't belong in the world. Panic surged through me, and with a force I didn't know I had, I twisted out of its grasp and crawled toward the corner, hoping, praying, for a way out. The figures reached for me, their hands skeletal and thin, their fingers long and sharp. They were closing in, and I knew they weren't going to stop. But just when I thought it was over, I heard something, a loud, forceful bang, like the sound of a door breaking open. It echoed through the apartment, reverberating against the walls. The figures stopped, their twisted faces turning in unison, as if something had interrupted their feast. The sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, came from the hallway. Someone was approaching, and then, as if guided by some unknown force, the figures retreated. Slowly, reluctantly, they melted back into the shadows, vanishing as if they had never been there at all. The door to the apartment swung open, and standing in the threshold was Greg. He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't say a word, just grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the room, dragging me into the hallway. "You shouldn't have opened that door," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "No one leaves after that. No one." I didn't argue. I didn't even know if I could speak anymore. My mind was a blur, trying to make sense of everything I just experienced. Had it all been real? Had it all been a hallucination? But one thing was certain, Greg wasn't the same either. His eyes were hollow, sunken, like something had drained the life out of him. As we stumbled down the hallway, I noticed the walls were no longer normal. They were covered in those same twisting symbols I had seen on the ceiling. The apartment was changing. It was alive, and it was coming for us. We ran. I didn't question Greg as he pulled me down the hall, his grip tight, like he knew something I didn't. I could hear the walls groaning, creaking, almost as if they were alive, shifting, breathing with some horrible life of their own. The air felt thick, as if it were pressing down on us, dragging us back toward that apartment. Greg didn't stop. He kept pulling me, moving faster, eyes wide with fear, as if the apartment itself was hunting us. It wasn't just a building, it was something far worse. I could feel it, deep in my bones, the way the floor seemed to tremble beneath our feet, the way the light flickered, casting eerie shadows in every corner. "Keep moving," Greg hissed, his voice cracked, filled with terror. "They know. They're watching." I didn't need to ask who he meant. It was the figures, those twisted, shadowy beings that had been waiting for me. They were still here, still lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. We reached the stairs, but when Greg tried to open the door to the outside, it wouldn't budge. It was like the building itself was holding us in, trapping us in its cursed embrace. I pulled at the door, but it wouldn't open. The handle was frozen, unyielding. "Help me," I screamed, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But Greg didn't respond. He was staring at the door, his face pale, his mouth moving silently as if he was muttering something to himself. And then I saw it. A shadow, dark, sharp, moving slowly toward us from the end of the hallway. It was him, the thing from the room, its limbs twisted, elongated, stretching toward us like a spider. Its face, it had no face, just a void, a black hole that swallowed everything in its path. Greg's eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw something in them that made my blood run cold. Regret. It wasn't fear anymore. It was resignation. "We can't escape," he whispered, his voice hollow. "None of us can." I turned to him, my heart pounding. "What are you talking about? What are we supposed to do?" But he didn't answer. Instead, he took one step back, his face twisted with pain. He reached out for the figure, almost like he was drawn to it, compelled. I wanted to grab him, to shake him out of it, but my body wouldn't move. It was as if the darkness had infected him, too. "Get away from it," I screamed, but Greg didn't listen. He stepped forward, into the darkness. The figure stretched its hand toward him, and in an instant, he was gone, vanished, absorbed by the shadows like he was never there. I could hear him scream, but it was muffled, as if his voice was swallowed by the very walls themselves. I was alone now. I don't remember how I made it out of the building. My mind was a blur, my body numb. The last thing I remember was stumbling into the street, gasping for air, the city lights blurring around me. I ran. I didn't stop. I never went back to that apartment. I don't think I ever could. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has moved in, if they've opened that door. But I don't want to know. I can't. The building is still there, just like it was before. Standing silently, watching, waiting. I left that place, but I don't think it's done with me. The whispers still follow me sometimes, and when the lights flicker, I feel it again. The cold, suffocating presence, lurking just outside my vision. I don't know if I survived that night, but I know one thing for sure. It's still out there. Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.